YouTube. Welcome back to another episode. We're here with Guys at Magic. This is Dave, your host. Today we're going to be taking you through another one of our deck techs. Before we dive into that though, make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel and also follow us on our other social media platforms. It's at Guys at Magic for both Twitter and Instagram. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're going to dive in and do a deck tech on the Council of Four, one of the new legendary creatures that just came out with Baldur's Gate. I know that set is a little bit divisive in terms of how it was received. However, I think there's a lot of really powerful and unique commanders that came out of it, and the Council of Four obviously so being one. So, let's dive in. For 3, a white and a blue, you get a 0/8 legendary creature, Human Noble. It says whenever a player draws their second card during their turn, you draw a card. Whenever a player casts their second spell during their turn, you create a 2/2 white knight creature token. So essentially what we're going to be wanting to do with this deck is we're going to want to draw as many cards as we possibly can, while also being able to chain together those draws to cast a bunch of spells, making this big old army of 2/2s, hopefully being able to boost them up a little bit, and then swing in with them. We do have 1 or 2 alternative win conditions in the deck, and we'll go ahead and get to those here within the next couple of minutes. Generally speaking, however, this is going to be a deck that's focused a little bit more on the controlling aspect of things. I have seen a couple people who have built this deck in more of a group hug, and if that's what you're looking for, I'm sorry to say, but that's actually not the way that I built it. I don't really want to help my opponents draw a lot of cards, and I don't exactly want to be helping them to play a bunch of spells in a single turn. Instead, I'm really hoping that, seeing as how my opponents just are playing Magic, they should be doing those things innately. We're really going to be focused on making sure that we can cast a bunch of things and draw a bunch of cards to be able to trigger our commander, and anything that our opponent gives us is just icing on the cake. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive in. We're going to talk about some of the creatures. This deck is relatively creature light. That is intentional. But we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the cards that just generally feel really good to be included in this deck just because of the color combination or how they work with the commander. The first one that I'm going to talk about here is Drannith Magistrate. It is 1 and a white for a creature human wizard. It's a 1/3 and it says your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. If you're playing white in EDH, to be honest, you should probably be including this card in your deck. It is just incredibly disruptive. Its ability to shut off your opponent's commanders is absolutely insane since they won't be able to cast them from the command zone. Essentially, they're going to have to remove this in order to get their game plan going. Grand Arbiter Augustine IV is 2 and a white and a blue for a total of 4 mana. He's a legendary creature, human advisor, a 2/3 that says white and blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. He gives us a nice little reduction on our things, allowing us to hopefully chain more stuff together over the course of a turn, while also slowing our opponents down a little bit. Esper Sentinel is a single white mana for a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier. It says whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card, unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. This is another card that just simply cannot be allowed to sit around and play because it will draw you way too many cards and put you way ahead in terms of overall board state. Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes are both included in this deck. They both do a wonderful job of protecting some of your toys. Giver of Runes is a single mana for a 1/2 that says tap it. Another target creature you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. Mother of Runes works fairly similarly. She's a single mana for a 1/1, and she says that you can tap it and target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Essentially, these are going to make sure that some of your larger threats or your commander is going to be able to stick around, and that removal is not very efficient. The next group of creatures we're going to talk about are creatures that really synergize very well with our commander and help to punish our opponents a little bit for some of the things we're going to be doing. The first one here is Mangara the Diplomat. This is 3 and a white for a legendary creature human cleric. He's a 2/4 with lifelink that states whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or a planeswalker you control, draw a card. He also states that whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, draw a card. This is going to help you out, and it fuels into your overall card draw, just like how your commander does. He also acts as a little bit of like a pillow fort in that your opponents don't really want to be attacking into you, knowing that not only do you have a 0/8 commander in play, but you're also going to end up drawing some cards as a result. Min the Wily Illusionist is a really interesting card that I think works very well in this deck. She is 1 and 2 blue for a legendary creature gnome wizard. She's a 1/3 with whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with. This creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. So those tokens are actually going to start to buff themselves. Whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. An important note here is that it's a permanent, and it actually doesn't say non-land permanent, which means that you can start to cheat in lands unless you have something else more valuable for you to be able to drop in. Those illusions are going to do some serious work. Ledger Shredder is a card that is very quickly climbing in both popularity and in price. He is 1 and a blue for a creature bird advisor. He's a 1/3 with flying, and he states that whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the connive mechanic, it says, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Ledger Shredder is very capable of building himself up to be a pretty notable threat, while also drawing you into cards and filtering out your hand. Tarlin the Sky Summoner is 2 and 2 blue for a total of 4 mana. He's a legendary creature merfolk wizard. He's a 2/2 with, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Although we typically see him a little bit more commonly in dedicated Spellslinger decks, and that's not quite what we are, we do still have a lot of instants and sorceries in the deck, and more than enough to justify his inclusion. In addition, his tokens coming in with flying are going to allow us to really gum up our board state and be able to provide us with an army of blockers. Psychosis Crawler is 5 mana for a Phyrexian Horror. It's a star, and it has power and toughness that are equal to the number of cards in your hand. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Well, that's going to be fantastic because with this deck, we're going to be drawing a ton of cards, so we're going to be weaponizing that card draw. Dream Trawler is the last creature included in this. It is 2 white, and 2 blue for a total of 6 mana. It's a creature Sphinx, it's a 3/5, it's got flying and lifelink. It says whenever you draw a card, Dream Trawler gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Whenever it attacks, draw a card, and you may discard a card to give it hexproof until end of turn and tap it. This is a card that not only is going to continue to draw us cards and continue to get larger as a result as well, but it has some built-in protection. Oftentimes with a deck like this, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we just simply have a ton of cards in hand. And if we happen to have a bunch of lands in hand that we don't end up playing, we can always feed it to Dream Trawler to give it hexproof and protect it. The next group of cards that we're going to talk about are going to be some of the cards that I have included in here to make sure that we can go ahead and not only protect our board, but also kind of punish our opponents for potentially overextending. The first one here is Slaughter the Strong. This is 1 a white and a white for a sorcery. It says each player chooses any number of creatures they control with total power 4 or less and sacrifice all other creatures they control. Now, yes, of course, if we've built up a decent board state and we have quite a bit of tokens in play, we're probably going to lose them, but our commander has 0 power, and as a result of such, it's going to be a free choice for us. Many of our other creatures are also on the smaller end of things, so Slaughter the Strong probably won't do much damage to us compared to what we can do to our opponents. Fell the Mighty is 4 and a white for a sorcery that states destroy all creatures with power greater than target creature's power. Another fantastic card. Go ahead and choose one of your smaller creatures and watch the rest of the board melt. Dusk is 2 and 2 white for a sorcery that says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Most of our creatures will dodge that. And the second part of this card, the Aftermath, is Dawn. For 3 and 2 white, you get a 5 mana sorcery that you can cast from your graveyard. Whenever you do, you return all cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So he's got a solid bit of recursion built in there too. The last one that we're going to talk about here is Promise of Loyalty. This is 4 and a white for a total of 5. It's a sorcery that states each player puts a vow counter on a creature they control and sacrifice the rest. Each of those creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control as long as it has a vow counter on it. This is wonderful because not only is this going to be able to nuke your opponent's boards, but it's also going to deal with the last threat that they still have remaining. It won't be able to attack into you, but it can still attack your opponents. Nothing better than sitting back and watching your opponents beat each other to death. We have a couple of other sorceries in this deck that these ones are going to be a little bit more dedicated to helping us out whenever it comes to card draw. Preordain is a single blue mana. It's a sorcery that stays scry 2, then draw a card. This card is not only just really good on its own, but with our commander in play, it's going to become straight up fantastic. A single blue mana to scry 2 and then draw 2 cards. That would be absolutely wonderful. Serum Visions, very similarly, is a single blue mana for a sorcery that has you draw a card and scry 2. And same thing with our commander in play. Just by casting this, we would be able to draw 2 cards, not just one off Serum Visions. Windfall is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. It says each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. This is a card that we do have to be a little bit careful about whenever we cast. We don't really want to be fueling how many cards our opponent's going to be potentially drawing into, but it is a nice way for us to restock our hand. The last sorcery I'm going to have included in here is Approach of the Second Sun. Just in case our tokens aren't enough for us to be able to get through, I do want to have a secondary win condition included in this deck, and seeing as how we're drawing so many cards, Approach of the Second Sun should really hum here. This card is 6 and a white for a total of 7 mana, and it states that if this spell is cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library 7th from the top and you gain 7 life. The first time we cast this, we'll gain 7 life, and this card will be tucked 7 from the top. Hopefully, with the amount of card draw that our deck goes through, this shouldn't take any more than 1 or maybe even 2 turns for us to redraw Approach of the Second Sun, at which point casting it wins us the game. Let's talk about some of the instants that we've included in this deck. The first instant here is a single blue mana for a Brainstorm. It says, draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Brainstorm, also a fantastic card just on its own, but gets even better with our commander in play. You would end up drawing the 3 from Brainstorm, putting 2 back on top, but you would also draw an additional for your commander. Consider is a single blue mana for an instant stating that you look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard and draw a card. Opt also is a single blue mana. It's an instant that says scry 1, draw a card. All of these kinds of effects work so incredibly well with our commander because we end up drawing an extra card and getting even more value off them. Faithful Mending is a white and a blue for an instant. It says you gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. It also has flashback for 1 a white and a blue where we can cast it a second time from our graveyard. Frantic Search is 2 and a white for an instant. It says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and untap up to 3 lands. Now, just as an important note here, all these cards are fantastic. However, our commander's only going to draw us that extra card if we cast these on our turn. Seeing as how these cards are, though, very, very cheap, or nearly free in a way, we can go ahead and we can use them on our turn, no problem. Not only does that allow us to be able to draw those cards, but it also hopefully allows us to make a 2/2 knight. As far as some interaction goes, we need to make sure that we're still keeping pace with our opponents and shutting down some of the nasty things that they want to do. We're going to be including Counterspell in this deck. Counterspell is 2 blue mana for an instant that says simply counter target spell. Disallow is 1 a blue and a blue for an instant stating that you can counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Arcane Denial works very well in this deck. It is 1 and a blue. It's an instant and says counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. You draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Depending on whose turn it is, this not only could draw you 1, but actually draw you 2 cards as a result of it. Negate is 1 and a blue. It's an instant that simply says counter target non-creature spell. And lastly here for our counterspell package, we have Swansong, a single blue mana for an instant that states counter target enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. Its controller puts a 2/2 blue creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Now, sadly, they are going to get a creature out of it, but I'm not super worried about the impact of a 2/2 over the game of EDH. We're going to have some creature removal and some permanent destruction in this deck as well, just in case some of our opponent's threats happen to slip by some of our counters. The first one here is Swords to Plowshares. It's a single white mana that you can use to exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Path to Exile, also a single mana, is an instant stating that you exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Ablation is 2 and a white for an instant, stating that the owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then draws 2 cards. Now, I know that we said that we didn't really want our opponents to be drawing a ton based off of what our deck is doing, but Ablation is a fantastic card because it has the ability to almost permanently deal with something, seeing as how they're going to be shuffling that non-land permanent away. And even though they are going to be drawing 2 cards, you could potentially be drawing off this too with your commander. Generous Gift is 2 and a white for an instant stating you destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Reality Shift is 1 and a blue for an instant stating that you exile target creature and its controller manifests the top card of his or her library. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Manifest, that player is going to put the top card of his or her library onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and if it is a creature card, it can be turned face up at any time for its mana cost. If it is not a creature, they can't actually flip it. Pongify is a single blue mana for an instant, stating that you destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated, and that creature's controller puts a 3/3 green ape creature token into play. And Rapid Hybridization is a single blue mana for an instant, stating destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. The creature's controller puts a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token onto the battlefield. 3 of our removal spells here are going to be giving them creatures, and then a fourth one will also end up manifesting a top card of their library. All of those are going to give them some kind of power and toughness, but considering our commander is a 0/8 and more than capable of blocking each of these things, I'm not really worried. I'm more hopeful that I'm actually going to give them something that they can then use on one of my other opponents. The last instant we're going to include in this deck is actually going to be focused a little bit more on how we're going to help our team whenever it comes to closing the game out. Over the course of the game, you should be amassing quite a few tokens, whether it be through Drakes, whether it be through Knights, or maybe one of the other sources we've yet to cover in this deck tech. A Chrome as well is 3 and a white for an instant that says choose one, and if you control your commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both. Creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn, or creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. With your commander in play and enough tokens, this can just outright win you the game. Giving your creatures that much damage to hit with, as well as the ability to just be completely unblockable since they do have protection, means that you're going to be swinging in for a massive amount of damage and not necessarily having to worry so much about the blowback for it. We're going to add a couple of mana rocks in here to help smooth things out. We are going to include Soul Ring, Felwar Stone, and Arcane Signet. I'm going to post them up there on the screen, but I'm not actually going to read off these cards. Thought Vessel is 2 mana, and it says that you have no maximum hand size. You can tap to add a colorless. Although Thought Vessel is not necessarily my favorite card, I actually really do love it in this deck and did want to make a point of talking about it. You do need to have a card or a couple cards in this deck that say you have no maximum hand size, just so that you can really capitalize on your card draw. Talisman of Progress is 2 generic mana for an artifact. You can tap it for a colorless mana, or you can tap it for either a white or a blue, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. These talismans are fantastic cards, as in the early game they might be able to smooth out your mana base while only dealing maybe a couple points of damage to you, and then once you get to the later portion of the game, whenever you have those lands in play and you don't really need the colored mana from this, tap it for the colorless and it'll no longer hurt you. Mind Stone is actually a really interesting card in this deck. Coming in at only 2 mana, you can tap it to add a colorless mana, or you can pay 1, tap it, and sack it to draw a card. If you do this ability on your turn, Mind Stone actually turns into a card that'll draw you 2, since you've already drawn that first. Command Sphere, same kind of thing here, is 3 mana for an artifact. You can tap it, add 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity, or you can sacrifice it to draw a card. I love the fact that this card cantrips, and working with our commander, it means we're drawing 2 cards, not just 1. We do have a couple of free artifacts in this deck, and I wanted to make sure that we could capitalize on having some free spells, not only because they really synergize with our commander, potentially allowing us to be able to cast that second spell the turn our commander drops, but also because they have some very relevant abilities. The first one here is Spellbook. It costs 0 mana for an artifact, and it states you have no maximum hand size. I cannot stress enough just how important those words are. Mishra's Bauble is 0 mana for an artifact. You can tap it and sacrifice it. Look at the top card of target player's library. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. You can use this on yourself if you would like to, just to kind of get a look at what it is you're going to be drawing into, or you can use this on an opponent to get a quick peek as to what's getting ready to touch their hand. Tormod's Crypt is 0 mana for an artifact. You can tap it and sacrifice it. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Chances are you're going to be playing up against at least one opponent who does care about their graveyard. Tormod's Crypt is a great little piece that you can be playing in here, and seeing as how it costs 0 mana, you're not really missing out by throwing it in a deck like this. We have a couple of utility artifacts. These are going to be artifacts that really work with our commander or help make sure that our commander sticks around. The first one here is Vinzer's Journal. This is 5 generic mana for an artifact that says you have no maximum hand size. It also states that at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. In a deck like this, that's really not going to be very uncommon for that number to be 10 or higher. That's going to be a pretty consistent stream of life gain for you while also providing that no hand size. Wedding Ring is 2 and 2 white for an artifact. It says whenever Wedding Ring enters the battlefield, if it was cast, target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, you draw a card. And whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring gains life during their turn, you gain that much life. Do be careful as to who it is that you give this to, and this is a little bit more of a politicking card. They're going to be drawing cards like you're drawing cards, and vice versa. Lightning Greaves is 2 mana here for an equipment artifact. It says equipped creature has haste and shroud and has an equip cost of 0. This is a card that we're really going to want to just put onto our commander. Make sure that not only does it have a big butt, but it also can't be the target of all those pesky removal spells our opponent's going to try to offload. Teferi's Puzzle Box is 4 generic mana for an artifact. It says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards of his or her hand at the bottom of his or her library in any order, then draws that many cards. This seems like a little bit of a weird inclusion, that it's a somewhat chaos card, but the positive thing about this card being is that our opponents are going to be drawing more than just 1 card per turn, which will trigger our commander. Now, whenever it does come around for our turn, of course, we're going to end up being subject to Fairy's Puzzle Box as well, but we should hopefully be drawing more cards based off of this. We have several enchantments that are going to be included in this deck, some that are just simply designed to help support our overall game plan. The first one is Wizard's Class. As an enchantment class, for a single blue mana, it states you have no maximum hand size. If you do level this up to level 2 for 2 and a blue, it says whenever it becomes level 2, draw 2 cards. Lastly, to level it up to level 3, you can pay 4 and a blue, and it says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This not only gives you the no maximum hand size, it also helps you to draw into additional cards later on, while making sure that you can also start to boost or power up some of your creatures. Ominous Seas is 1 and a blue for an enchantment, stating that whenever you draw a card, put a foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas. You can remove 8 foreshadow counters from Ominous Seas to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token, and this card does have cycling too. I don't recommend that you do end up cycling this thing away though, because this card can be an absolute beating in the late game. You're going to be drawing a ton of cards, which means you could be making quite a few of these Krakens, and an 8/8 is nothing to laugh at. Curse of Verbrosity is in this deck. It is 2 and a blue for a total of 3 mana. It's an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Whenever any enchanted player is attacked, you draw a card. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. This is going to incentivize your opponents to beat up whichever player you've cursed with this, while you sit back and just simply draw cards based off of that. This next group of cards that we're going to talk about are not necessarily just going to support for the card draw aspect, but they're going to focus more so on how we support those tokens we're going to be making. The first one here is Divine Visitation. This is 3 and 2 white for a total of 5 mana. It's an enchantment that states if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. Those 2/2 knights may not necessarily be scary, but a 4/4 with flying and vigilance most certainly is. Intangible Virtue is a great card here. It is 1 in a white for an enchantment. It says creature tokens you control have +1/+1 and vigilance. Your 2/2 knights now become 3/3 knights with an added keyword. Felidar Retreat is 3 and a white for an enchantment. It's got landfall and says whenever a land enters battlefield under your control, choose 1. The first mode allows you to create a 2/2 white cat. The first mode allows you to create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, while the second mode allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. Lastly here, for our token support, we have Cathar's Crusade. This is 3 and 2 white for an enchantment, stating that whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. We're a deck that's capable of making a ton of tokens, which means we can be putting out and spreading out the love of a ton of counters. Lastly, to wrap up the remaining of our enchantments, these are going to be cards that are just going to generally be good in the deck, going to help us out with some card draw, or just try to interfere with what our opponents are doing. The first one that we're going to include here is Court of Grace. This is 2 and 2 white for an enchantment, stating that whenever it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the monarch mechanic, if you are the monarch, you'll draw a card at the end of your turn, but if somebody deals combat damage to you, they will steal the monarchy, making them the monarch until somebody deals combat damage to them. This card also states that at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. If you're still the Monarch, though, you create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying instead. Either way, you'll end up making a token out of it, which is really nice, but if you do hold on to the crown, you'll make a 4/4 angel. Rhystic Study is going to be an inclusion in this deck because of just how powerful of a draw engine it is. It is 2 and a blue and states, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Up next is Witness Protection for a single blue mana. It's an enchantment aura. It says Enchant Creature. Enchant Creature loses all abilities and is a green and white citizen creature with base power and toughness 1/1, named Legitimate Business Person. This is a super fun card if you can drop this on an opponent's commander and watch them start to squirm. Blind Obedience coming in here is 1 and a white for an enchantment. It has Extort. This says that whenever you cast a spell, you may pay either a white or a black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. Obviously, we are playing in a white-blue deck, so we won't be paying any black mana for this, but we can still pay that white mana into it anytime we cast a spell to start to drain our opponents. This card also states that artifacts and creatures our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This means that our 2/2 knights might have the opportunity to get in for some combat damage. We are going to be running 3 Planeswalkers in this deck to just kind of help smooth a couple of other problems over. The first one here is Elspeth Sun's Champion. She is 4 and 2 white. She's a 4/4 with 3 abilities on her. Her first ability is a +1 that states put 3 1/1 white creature tokens onto the battlefield. This allows you to gum up the board very, very quickly. A -3 stating destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater, which is wonderful considering most of our things should still live. Lastly, she does have a -7 that says you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2, and have flying. In a deck like ours, that can very quickly close out a game. Teferi, Master of Time, is 2 and 2 blue for a legendary planeswalker. He comes in with 3 loyalty, and he has a passive stating that you may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn, anytime you could cast an instant. His first ability is a +1 that allows you to draw a card, then discard a card. Second ability is a -3, stating that target creature you control phases out. That means that you treat it and anything attached to it as though they don't exist until its controller's next turn. Lastly, it has a -10 that says take 2 extra turns after this one. Teferi, Master of Time is a wonderful draw engine, seeing as how you can activate this on your opponent's turns as well. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries is 1, a blue, and a blue for a total of 4 mana. He comes in with 4 loyalty, and his passive states that if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. His +1 says target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, draw a card. His -8 says draw 7 cards. Then, if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. This card can be really interesting because in the case that we do end up going to a later portion of the game and maybe end up decking ourselves to our card draw, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries not only keeps us alive, but actually helps us to win that game based off of his passive clause. As far as lands go, we're going to be breaking these up into basically 3 different categories. Some utility lands, some lands that'll help smooth out our mana base, and then lastly, we're going to dive into basics. The first category here just going to be some utility lands. The first one is Castle Vantress. It says that it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. You can tap it to add a blue mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 2 and 2 blue, tap it, and scry 2. It's not necessarily going to be drawing you cards, but it's still wonderful to see that you'll be able to start scrying away and hopefully be able to draw something good. Mystic Sanctuary is an island. You can tap it to have it add a blue mana to your mana pool. It says that it enters the battlefield tapped, though, unless you control 3 or more other islands, which is totally fine because this is a late game card. It says whenever it enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. Whatever kind of instant or sorcery you think you may need to be able to reuse, it's fair game to be able to recur it. Lastly, we have Reliquary Tower in here. This is a land that taps for a colorless mana that also says you have no maximum hand size. Some of the lands that we're going to include in here that can tap for 1 mana of any of our commander's color identities. We have Command Tower, which literally can tap for any color of our commander's color identity. We have Exotic Orchard that will tap for 1 mana of any color that a land that opponent controls could produce. Chances are, at a table of 4, at least one other player should be playing one of these 2 colors. Temple of Enlightenment says that it enters the battlefield tapped, but whenever it does, you scry 1. Later on, it can tap for both a white or a blue. Port Town says, as it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a plains or an island card from your hand, and if you don't, Port Town enters the battlefield tapped. So if you do reveal either the island or the plains, it comes in and untapped, and you'll be able to use that right away. You can tap it for either a white or a blue. Glacial Fortress says whenever it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped unless you control a plains or an island, and same thing, you can tap for either color. And lastly here we have Prairie Stream. This is a plains island, and I can tap for either a white or a blue, but it says that it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Totally fine in a deck like this. With us only being in 2 colors, we can afford to have quite a few basics. Speaking of which, we'll be running 12 plains and 13 islands in the deck to wrap up the rest of the mana base. All in all, this deck is going to come into about $250. At least that's what TCG Player currently has me clocked at. If you're looking to build this deck a little bit on the cheaper side, there are a couple of notable cards that you can choose to take out of this deck. Things like Rhystic Study, Ledger Shredder, or Esper Sentinel will really reduce the cost of this deck and probably put it under the $200 mark. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. The Council of 4 was most certainly a very fun one for me to put together, and I really look forward to playing this deck up against some of the other guys here on the channel. We would love to have you go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what it is that you liked or didn't like about this video. Maybe recommend a couple legendary creatures that you think are interesting and would like to see us do a deck tech on in the future. Thank you so much for all the love and support, and this has been Guys at Magic. Peace.